Bluesmechanistin.
Ja, als sie ins Mädchenorchester eingetreten ist, sie hat ja noch nie Schieberklavier gehabt.
Leg los, Junge. Leg los. Das kann man doch nicht noch eine Stunde machen.
Sollen wir anfangen?
Ja.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Freunde, im Namen der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, Peter-Iemand-Gesellschaft und den Kooperationspartnern Vereinigung der Folgten des Naziregimes, Bund der Antifaschistinnen und Antifaschisten sowie der Attac-Gruppe Untere Saar, darf ich Sie alle recht herzlich hier in Saarbrücken begrüßen. Und unsere besondere Gruß gilt natürlich der Hauptperson dieses Tages, Candice Breitz. Professorin Candice Breitz verbrachte ihre Kindheit in Johannesburg. Sie studierte in Südafrika und den USA Kunstgeschichte. Dann arbeitete sie einige Jahre in New York. Seit 2003 lebt und arbeitet sie in Berlin. Sie hat an der Hochschule für Bildende Künste Braunschweig eine Professur für Raumkonzepte inne. 2005 gelang Candice Breitz der Durchbruch bei der Kunstbiennale in Venedig mit ihrer Videoinstallation Massa and Farsa. Ist Sex-Arbeit ein ganz normaler Job? Mit dieser Frage beschäftigt sich sie in ihrer Videoinstallation, die wir dieses Jahr im Saarland hätte sehen sollen. 3 Jahre umfassten die Vorarbeiten, aber es kam anders. Aus heiterem Himmel erhielt die Künstlerin im November 2023 eine Absage. Die Absage der Ausstellung hat eine enorme Kontroverse ausgelöst, die sich auch in den internationalen und deutschen Medien, darunter in der New York Times, in Le Monde und anderen widerspiegelt. Wir haben die Veranstaltung ANATOMIE eines Vorfalls genannt. Wir wollen etwas genauer untersuchen hinter die Oberfläche schauen und hoffen, dass wir daraus lernen. Kunst ist kein debattenfreies Idyll, überschrieben zahlreiche Künstlerinnen und Künstler ihren Protest gegen die Ausladung von Candice Breitz. Ich bin sehr froh, dass ich mich dieser Initiative als einer der Erstunterzeichner habe anschließen dürfen. Unterstellt wird der Künstlerin und Jüdin das Pharma des Antisemitismus. Es gäbe kontroverse Äußerungen. Richtig ist, sie übt Kritik an der Politik der rechtsextremen Regierung Israels. Dies als Antisemitismus zu bezeichnen, mag der aktuellen Logik der Staatsräson entsprechen. Belegbar ist es kaum. Hat irgendwer der Verantwortlichen über diesen Vorwurf mit der Künstlerin gesprochen? Nein. Candice Breitz bezeichnet die Absage als antisemitisch, zumal sich hier eine deutsche Institution in die Position des Urteilenden versetzt, was jüdische Menschen in diesem Lande sagen dürfen und denken. Und dies ohne Gespräch. So würden Scheingerichte funktionieren, stellte sie in einem Interview im Dezember fest. Ob Legislative, Judikative oder Exekutive, sie haben einst fast alle Judenmörder und Nazis laufen gelassen und spielen sich nun als Experten für Antisemitismus auf. Nicht etwa wegen der Shoah, sondern wegen der Kriegstüchtigkeit ist Israels Sicherheit Staatsräson. Wenn die Kultusministerin Christine Streichert-Clivot etwas gegen Antisemitismus tun will, dann darf sie uns sicher an ihrer Seite wissen. Unsere Lehre aus der Geschichte bedeutet stets und immer solidarisch auf der Seite jener zu stehen, denen Gewalt und Unrecht angetan wird. Und wenn der Verteidigungsminister der rechtsradikalen Regierung Netanyahu bezüglich der Kriegsführung im Gazastreifen sagt, Zitat, kein Strom, kein Essen, kein Sprit, alles wird abgeriegelt. Wir kämpfen gegen menschliche Tiere und handeln entsprechend. Dann verlangt das Protest und Widerspruch. Und wenn die verstorbene Ehrenvorsitzende der VVN, Bund der Antifaschisten, die Saarlouerin und Auschwitz-Überlebende Esther Becerrano sich selbst als Antizionistin beschrieb, dann kann man diese Meinung nicht mit angeblichen Tokenizing abtun, wie die Sprecherin der saarländischen Recherche- und Informationsstelle Antisemitismus dies belehrend und hochtrabend uns per Saarbrücker Zeitung mitteilte. Nun ist die Museumsdirektorin Andrea Jahn gegangen. Es gibt ein Chatprotokoll zwischen ihr und Candice Breitz. Hat die Kultusministerin die Affäre per UKAS ausgelöst? Was und welche Meinung man nun auch im konkreten Fall hat, es ist nicht zu leugnen, das Verhalten der saarländischen Kulturpolitik erzeugte ein Klima der Verunsicherung und Angst unter der hiesigen Künstlerin. Was ist noch erlaubt zu sagen? Gefährde ich mit meiner politischen Meinung meine von der öffentlichen Hand geförderten Kunstprojekte? Aber die Angst geht weiter. Menschen befürchten Nachteile, wenn sie ihre Meinung sagen. Und wir verraten kein Geheimnis, dass es für uns recht schwierig war, für diese Veranstaltung einen Raum zu finden. Und sehr viele, die wir für diese öffentliche Diskussion ansprachen, verweigerten ihre Teilnahme. Umso mehr gilt unser Dank an Dr. Jürgen Albers, der sich zur Moderation bereit erklärte. Das gesellschaftliche Klima ist Gift für eine demokratische Gesellschaft. Die Namensgeberin unserer Stiftung war bekanntlich auch Jüdin. Und eines ihrer bekanntesten Sätze lautete: Freiheit ist immer die Freiheit der Andersdenkenden. Wir nehmen diesen Satz sehr ernst. Wir wollen den demokratischen Diskurs, wollen nicht übereinander, sondern miteinander reden. Wir haben deshalb alle Beteiligten an dieser Auseinandersetzung eingeladen, hier an dem Gespräch mit der Künstlerin teilzunehmen. Wir bedauern sehr, dass unsere Idee nach einem Gespräch, nach einer Podiumsdiskussion miteinander nicht von den Befürwortern der Ausladung aufgegriffen wurde. Umso mehr freuen wir uns, dass wir Candice Breitz hier ein Podium bieten können, denn ihr Wunsch war und ist es, selbst mit der saarländischen Politik und der Kunstszene ins Gespräch zu kommen. Wir freuen uns auf eine interessante und erkenntnisreiche Veranstaltung. Du hast das Wort, Candice.
This beautiful Meinl Herold accordion was made approximately 100 years ago in Klingenthal by the same company that is famous for having produced military bugles for the Nazis. A friend in Berlin generously allowed me to borrow the instrument, which once belonged to her great-grandmother. I spent some time with this accordion in the city of Saint-Louis yesterday. I thought Saint-Louis would be a good place to gather my thoughts, to reflect on what it was that I wanted to say here tonight. While reading about the late, great Esther Bejarano earlier this year, I had accidentally discovered that Esther was born in Saint-Louis in 1924. For those of us who fall on the left side of the Jewish spectrum, Esther's legacy remains intensely inspiring. The fact that she would have been 100 years old this year was very much on my mind as I planned my trip to Saarland. If I was going to be in Saarland, I decided I wanted to pay my respects to Esther. I wanted to play a song for Esther in the city of her birth. I wanted to play that song on an accordion that had witnessed and survived the same century as Esther, who, against all odds, managed to live to the ripe old age of 96 after being subject to the sheer horror of 2 concentration camps, Auschwitz-Birkenau and Ravensbrück, as well as a sadistic death march. Where better to play my song for Esther than on Esther Bejarano Platz in Saint-Louis? Where better a place to gather my thoughts? After 6 months of being stigmatized and demonized by Saarland's Minister of Education and Culture, a miserable half a year of watching from a distance as the minister took every available opportunity to denounce and slander me in the local press, while simultaneously doing everything in her power to prevent me from participating in the local debate around the cancellation of my exhibition at the Saarland Museum in November 2023. I was finally being invited to Saarbrücken. My reputation and my integrity have been on trial in this city since the Stiftung Saarländischer Kulturbesitz, over which the minister presides, abruptly cancelled an exhibition of my work that had been in the planning for 3 years, within less than 48 hours. The decision to cancel the exhibition was driven by panic and fear. It was made in response to a slanderous newspaper article that was published in late November 2023, in which I was portrayed as an unhinged critic of Netanyahu's far-right regime and a callous opportunist who is utterly indifferent to the suffering and trauma of Jewish people. The discovery of this toxic little piece of reportage, which has since been redacted under the pressure of a court order after being found by a German court to be heavily defamatory was inevitably followed after the exhibition had been cancelled by some sloppy scouring of my social media by the minister and her subordinates. This research would certainly have confirmed my position vis-à-vis the nightmare that is continuing to unfold in Israel-Palestine. The minister and her lackeys, while combing through my social media to desperately seek evidence for a decision that had already been made, would no doubt have found that I had shared opinions such as the following, behind which I continue to firmly stand. And I quote from one of my Instagram posts. At a moment like this, those of us who identify as Jewish or come from Jewishness need to ask ourselves collectively whether certain decisions that are being made by the Israeli government to the ends of protecting Jews, and by extension, a number of measures and policies that are being applied far beyond Israel in response to the current horror, including in Germany, are really likely to make Jews any safer. At times like these, it is tempting to forget that less than half of the world's Jews live in Israel. Yet all Jews will experience, to some degree or another, the dramatic erosion of safety that is the inevitable outcome of the Hamas attacks and the path of response that the current Israeli regime has chosen. I should not have to point out that Palestinians will collectively bear the brunt of Hamas's brutal attacks too, in one way or another, whether directly or indirectly, while additionally having to face the horrific losses that have already occurred and are still to come at a potentially genocidal scale, unless we speak up now. It is possible to fully condemn Hamas, as I do unequivocally, while nevertheless supporting the broader Palestinian struggle for freedom from oppression, discrimination, and occupation. It is on the basis of such opinions, which appear to have been highly offensive to the minister, although they are non-violent, and although it is entirely within my legal and constitutional rights to hold them, although they are entirely in keeping with official stances that have been taken by a wide range of human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, that the minister has concluded that I am a dangerous threat to the safety of Jewish people. I was, as such, not allowed to state my case before the decision to cancel the exhibition was made, nor has the museum invited me into private or public dialogue since the cancellation. I have, in fact, yet to receive anything at all in writing from the museum to confirm that the exhibition, which was scheduled to be on right now at the Saarland Museum, is not going to be taking place. Not even the shortest or coldest of emails. In the kangaroo court in which my case has been tried, time is not wasted on such quaint formalities. Within the logic of this show trial, for the purposes of which Minister Streichert-Clivot has conveniently appointed herself both judge and jury, you will no doubt have noticed that hers is the only voice that has provided evidence in the last 6 months. It is not necessary to stage a fair hearing or any hearing at all for a defendant. The defendant has, in fact, been completely excluded from the proceedings. Neither is it necessary in the kangaroo court of Minister Streichert-Clivot for actual evidence of any kind to be provided. Since the cancellation of the exhibition, the minister has had 6 months to produce evidence of my anti-Semitism. Some evidence, any evidence at all, to lend justification to the cancellation of the exhibition. None has been forthcoming. Why would Judge Streichert-Clivot allow the most basic of democratic procedures, such as granting the defendant an opportunity to state her case, such as having to provide credible fact-based evidence, to get in the way of arriving at a swift and damning verdict that effectively amounts to the character assassination of a Jewish artist? The fact that I have voiced public condemnation since the 7th of October, not only of the grotesque attacks that led to the death of over 1,000 Israelis in southern Israel at the hands of Hamas insurgents on the 7th of October, but also of the right-wing government of Israel, a government that includes politicians who proudly describe themselves as fascists, racists, and homophobes, a government populated by ministers who spew genocidal rhetoric, a government that has at this point massacred over 35,000 people in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are civilians, the vast majority of whom are women and children. Over 15,000 children have died as a result of Israel's retaliatory attack on Gaza. This, it seems, these opinions provided reason enough for the minister to conduct a vicious campaign of defamation against me. While wishing to be perceived as a country that dignifies and protects Jewishness, it has become abundantly clear since the 7th of October, although the trend can be traced back much earlier, that Germany is in reality only willing to tolerate Jewish opinions that fall neatly within its own narrow Meinungskorridor. Jews remain a tiny minority in this country. We know why. Less than 0.5% of Germany's inhabitants currently identify as Jewish, 0.5%. Nevertheless, since the 7th of October 2023, approximately 25% of the cultural workers and initiatives that have had their events cancelled, defunded, and deplatformed as punishment for speaking out against Israel's disproportionate and indiscriminate killing of Palestinian civilians are Jewish. 25%. In keeping with this trend, Minister Streichert-Clivot, it would appear, is hell-bent on going down in history as the first Minister of Culture to preside over the cancellation of a major exhibition by a Jewish artist at a German museum since the Nazi era. It seems to matter to her very little as she continues to systematically destroy her credibility, that she is also dragging the city of Saarbrücken and its cultural institutions into a deeper and deeper state of disgrace and disrepute. Given that the exhibition was cancelled without legal grounds or due process, given that no substantial evidence has been put forward as the basis for the cancellation, and given that the decision to cancel the exhibition is flagrantly contemptuous of the German Constitution, undermining both the freedom of expression of the Saarland Museum, the right of a publicly funded museum, in other words, to Kunstfreiheit, and the right of this artist to hold nonviolent political opinions, my Meinungsfreiheit, in other words, I naturally expect to be paid my artist's fee in full, as agreed upon in writing over the course of 3 years, several meetings, and hundreds of emails. It probably won't surprise you at this point in time to hear that the invoice which I sent to the museum in December 2023, 6 months ago, has gone completely ignored by the minister. No need to pay artists for 3 years of labor in Saarland. There are, of course, plenty of historical precedents in the German context when it comes to extracting labor from Jews without compensation. When it comes to deplatforming, sidelining, and gaslighting Jews. When it comes to bullying and stigmatizing Jews to drive through cynical political agendas. Nor is it uncommon in this country for Jews who refuse to play the role that has been assigned to them by Germany in the wake of the Holocaust to be publicly tarred and feathered by German politicians and the German press. For Germany to be able to project a flattering image of itself as a nation in 2024 as the great protector of the Jewish people, as a stalwart ally to the state of Israel, as the country that is so deeply committed to atoning for its bloody murder of 6 million Jews, that it has literally declared the safety of Israel to be its primary reason for existence as a nation. But in order for this flattering image of Germany to be projected on the geopolitical stage globally, Jews must march obediently to German expectations. They must avoid triggering Germans by drawing conclusions about past or current affairs in Israel that may be in contradiction with what Germans want and need to hear. They must live their Jewishness in compliance with a dumbed-down script that serves the ideological interests both of Israel's far-right government and of Germany's sycophantically philo-Semitic political class, a script in which Jews are cast as eternal victims who are devoid of political agency and could, as such, never be perpetrators. A script in which the state of Israel is routinely and ignorantly conflated with the Jewish people, and in which legitimate criticism of the Israeli government is largely held to be synonymous with the hatred of Jews. For Germany to be able to feel virtuous on the world stage, Jews must relinquish their Meinungsfreiheit and bow to the petty ineptitude and political opportunism of provincial bureaucrats like Minister Streichert, Streichert-Clivot. We must let go as Jews of deeply held humanitarian convictions in order to pander to the dubious vagaries of Staatsräson. Germany's Federal Commissioner for Anti-Semitism, Felix Klein, has publicly urged progressive Israelis, for example, to curb their criticism of their own country out of sensitivity to Germans. In contemporary Germany, Jews must be willing to self-censor so as to avoid hurting the feelings of non-Jewish Germans by asking hard questions that hold Israel accountable for war crimes and the breaking of international law. We must cater to the fragility of the very nation that not so long ago killed 6 million of our ancestors. As these expectations continue to harden into dogma, the cold, hard facts that pertain to Germany's historical persecution of Jews are often perversely flipped to facilitate the framing of those Jewish people who are not willing to play by the German rules as perpetrators of anti-Semitic violence. For Jews to remain kosher in Germany, in other words, and eligible to participate in publicly funded discourse, to take place in exhibitions, concerts, symposia, and other cultural events, they must pretend not to notice the gross injustices that Palestinians have had to suffer since the founding of Israel as a nation in 1948. It is not only since the 7th of October that inconvenient Jews who won't follow the German guidelines for Jewishness, have been pilloried in public. Nobody was more aware of these dynamics than Esther Bejarano. In 2017, a symposium titled 50 Years of Israeli Occupation, Our Responsibility for a Peaceful Solution to the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, was scheduled to take place in Frankfurt. The symposium would have included several highly respected Jewish and/or Israeli speakers. Uwe Becker, who was the mayor of Frankfurt at the time, went to great lengths to get the symposium canceled. Like so many other German politicians, Becker understood the political capital that could be generated via the casual conflation of criticism of Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism. He declared all of the would-be participants in the conference, including the many who were Jewish and/or Israeli, to be anti-Semites on the basis of their criticism of the Israeli government. He declared that they would no longer be welcome in the city of Frankfurt. Esther Bejarano and Rolf Becker wrote a moving statement of solidarity to protest Uwe Becker's vilification of the participants in the cancelled symposium. Their statement began by quoting a poem by the Jewish Austrian poet Erich Fried, himself a Holocaust survivor. I read you a few lines from the poem written by Erich Fried, as quoted by Esther and Rolf in their statement of solidarity. Sie nennen mich Verräter an meinem Volk. Sie nennen mich jüdischer Antisemit, weil ich spreche von dem, was sie tun in Israels Namen gegen Palästinenser, gegen Araber, andere Länder und auch gegen Juden, die totgeschwiegen werden. Later on, in the same statement of solidarity, Bejarano and Becker quoted another inconvenient Jew, their longtime friend Moshe Zuckerman, the son of Holocaust survivors. Wer meint, den Antisemitismus bekämpfen zu sollen, vermeide es vor allem, Israel, Judentum und Zionismus, mithin Antisemitismus, Antizionismus und Israelkritik wahllos in seinen deutschen Eintopf zu werfen, um es je nach Lage opportunistisch zu verkochen und demagogisch einzusetzen. I come back to Esther Bejarano because for so many of us on the left of Jewishness, Esther, who died in 2021, remains a moral compass. At the time that she was born, Esther's father, Rudolf Löwy, was serving as a cantor at the local synagogue in Saarlouis, a synagogue that stood on the square that would eventually be named after his daughter, a century after her birth, Esther Bejarano Platz. During the pogroms of November 1938, the synagogue in Saarlouis was severely vandalized by Nazi thugs. Papa Löwy and the synagogue's rabbi were, like so many other Jews, publicly humiliated, brutally beaten, arrested, and detained. The Saarlouis synagogue was one of 1,400 synagogues that were torched and desecrated during the so-called Kristallnacht attacks. Those passing through Esther Bejarano Platz yesterday, as I played my song for Esther, appeared largely oblivious to the Jewish trauma that invisibly haunts the square on which the synagogue once sat. From photographs that were taken on the 24th of September 2022, during the ceremony at which the site became Esther Bejarano Platz, we learn that an accordion player was present to the ceremony. The public in attendance were surely reminded by the local officials who spoke that day of the significant role that the instrument had once played in saving Esther's life. Esther was 19 at the time that she first played the accordion. The year was 1943. She was a recent arrival to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The number 41948 had been freshly tattooed on her left arm. Most prisoners at the camp died within a few months of their incarceration. Murder came to them in different guises. One could be gassed to death, or shot to death, or burnt to death, or one could simply be worked to death. Vernichtung durch Arbeit was the chilling phrase that Goebbels used to refer to the latter mode of murder, extermination through labor. Esther, who was tiny in stature, spent her first month at the death camp schlepping rocks senselessly from one side of a field to the other and back again. It did not take her long to realize at the death camp that had the words Arbeit macht frei conspicuously emblazoned above its main entrance, that she was in the process of being exterminated through labor. Looking back on the hellish experience at Auschwitz in later life, Esther would explain how music had saved her from a certain death. The turning point came when Esther learned that the camp's Mädchenorchester, women's orchestra, was looking for additional musicians. Esther put herself forward out of sheer desperation to escape the punishing labor that she knew would kill her. Esther was a talented piano player who had been raised by musical parents. As it turned out, however, the orchestra only needed an accordion player. And I quote Esther. These words mean so much to me. Die Steine waren unheimlich schwer und ich war damals schon sehr klein und zierlich. Daher musste ich unbedingt da weg und hatte Glück. Eines Abends suchte eine andere Gefangene nach Frauen, die ein Instrument beherrschten. Da meldete ich mich sofort und sagte, dass ich Klavier spielen könne. Das gab es in Auschwitz aber nicht. Sie bot mir an als Alternative das Akkordeon an. Ich sollte darauf den Schlager Du hast Glück bei den Frauen Bellamy spielen. Ich hatte noch nie ein Akkordeon in der Hand gehabt und log daher. Ich hätte schon länger nicht mehr geübt und bräuchte ein paar Minuten, um mich einzuspielen. Die einzige, was ich über das Akkordeon wusste, war, das muss gezogen werden, damit ein Ton rauskommt. Ich hatte ja keine Ahnung, ne? Wie funktioniert das Ding überhaupt, ja? Rechte Seite war überhaupt kein Problem, weil das war ja Klaviertasten. Aber links, ja, also diese Knöpfe. Aber ich hab mir gesagt, ich muss das schaffen. Ich muss das schaffen. Ich muss aufgenommen werden in dieses Orchester, sonst bin ich erledigt. I have no doubt that many in this room have heard the story before. Saarland is very proud of its honorary citizen, Esther Bejarano, and has celebrated her memory in many ways, including by naming a square and a youth center after her in Saint-Louis. When it comes to how Esther spent her years after surviving the Nazis' many attempts to murder her, however, the way that the story gets told tends to be a little more complicated. According to the short and most broadly circulated version of Esther's story, the one that you're most likely to read in German newspapers, most likely to hear being recounted by German politicians, Esther emigrated to Palestine, what was Palestine, right after the war, where she met her husband Nissim Bejarano, with whom she had 2 children, before they decided to return to Germany in 1960. The slimmer version of the story, which is not inaccurate but leaves out some very significant facts, let's call it the half-truth, goes something like this. Esther and Nissim returned from Israel to the land in which Esther's parents and sisters had been murdered in cold blood, because Esther could not stand the Israeli climate. The irony embedded in this explanation hits me hard every time I come across it. According to this slimmed-down version of Esther's story, the one that is safe for German ears, Esther returned to Germany from Israel because she couldn't take the heat. In Yiddish, we would describe that as chutzpah. Back in Germany, as per the more comfortable accounts of Esther's life, accounts that would not make German politicians convulse with anxiety, Esther became a passionate activist. She took part in demonstrations against war, fascism, racism, and anti-Semitism. She fought for justice for refugees. She spoke in countless schools about her experiences during the Holocaust. She performed anti-fascist and Jewish resistance songs in public until very shortly before her death. So far, so good. This is the feel-good version of Esther's story, the one that doesn't offend German sensibilities. Allow me now to turn briefly to the less convenient facts of Esther's biography, the facts that make some Germans squirm, the facts that are often conveniently simply left out when Esther's story is told. None of these inconvenient facts diminish Esther in my eyes. On the contrary, perversely, it is the facts that tend to be edited out of Esther's story that point to the magnitude and depth of her humanitarianism. Esther did not, in fact, return to Germany because she couldn't take the heat in Israel. Esther and Nissim left Israel because, in Esther's words, my husband and I could not stand Israeli politics. It was a catastrophe. Life was difficult because we did not agree with the terrible things that were being done to the Palestinians. Israel fought against them, threw them out. They didn't leave on their own. They were forced to leave. We just could not stand that. It was, to be precise, the couple's aversion to Israel's policies towards Palestinians that prompted Esther and Nissim to return to Germany. Again, given the brutal treatment that Palestinians are having to endure in this country at this moment in time, the irony here is hard to miss. To keep things concise, let's just say that Esther was a vocal supporter of Palestinian rights in her later life and often spoke out against Israel's inhumane treatment of Palestinians, which she described as fascist. Esther was fierce in her criticism of the Israeli government and saw the BDS movement as a legitimate instrument via which to challenge Israel's persecution of Palestinians. These aspects of Esther's story have largely been repressed in the German context, including in the obituaries that were written to mark her passing. Because if these aspects of Esther were not swept under the carpet, they might disrupt German expectations and make life complicated for small-minded politicians like your Minister of Culture, Christina Streichert-Clivot. The same minister who canceled my exhibition on the basis of political opinions that are largely aligned with, if not identical, with those held by Esther Bejerano, is absolutely comfortable being the Schirmherrin of the Esther Bejerano Prize here in Saarbrücken. Is Minister Streichert-Clivot aware that Esther was sometimes accused in her later years of being an anti-Semite after having survived Auschwitz and Ravensbrück by the children and grandchildren of the very people who tried so hard but failed to murder her? We can only speculate. Were Esther Bejerano alive today, I have no doubt that she would be calling for a ceasefire, that she too would be demanding an end to Israel's brutal and bloody bombardment of Gaza, that she too would be standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people as they seek self-determination and an end to their oppression. If Esther Bejarano were alive today, would Minister Streichert-Clivot be working night and day to strip her of her status as an honorary citizen of Saarland? We can only speculate. It took me months to realize that my ugly experience at the hands of your Minister of Culture, the experience of being deplatformed and defunded, of being endlessly stigmatized and cynically slandered, could in fact be traced directly back to a speech that I had given at a peaceful protest that was held not far from the Brandenburger Tor in Berlin on the 10th of November 2023, a month after the abominable atrocities of the 7th of October 2023. In the statement that I made at the demonstration, which was organized by a loose coalition of Jews and Israelis, I invoked Esther Bejarano. To be precise, I described those who would be taking the platform at the protest that night as the descendants of Esther Bejarano. We felt Esther's absence at our protest because had she not passed away a couple of years earlier, she would have been a very powerful and necessary voice to include in the evening's proceedings. Over the course of the evening, those of us who spoke condemned Hamas repeatedly. We called loudly for the release of all hostages and political prisoners. We demanded an immediate ceasefire to terminate the merciless bombardment of Gazan civilians and an end to the inhumane violence that Palestinians have faced for so long and continue to face. We gathered, in other words, to insist on the implementation of humanitarian law and human rights as per the legacy of Esther Bejarano. I had no idea at the time of giving that speech that Esther had been born in Saarland, just a few kilometers from where we find ourselves tonight. Neither did I have any idea whatsoever at that point that just 2 weeks later, an exhibition that I had been working on at the Saarland Museum for over 3 years would be canceled as a result of some nasty press about the protest. I was about to be publicly and maliciously attacked by the Minister of Culture of Saarland, exactly 100 years after Esther was born in Saarlouis, for having made a public statement that paid homage to Esther and echoed the same progressive Jewish values that were at the core of Esther's tireless activism. As I spend time with you here today, there is another important date that I believe Esther would want me to mention. I believe that Esther would want me to point out that today is Nakba, Remembrance Day. For those who might not know, Nakba Day commemorates the permanent displacement and dispossession of approximately 3/4 of the Palestinian population, parallel to the founding of the State of Israel, along with the ongoing injustices that Palestinians have been forced to endure ever since. Like the Hebrew word Shoah, which refers to Germany's attempt to eliminate European Jewry, the Arabic word Nakba can be translated as catastrophe. Without the mass expulsion of Palestinians, which involved the depopulation and destruction of over 500 villages and the massacre of countless Palestinian civilians, the establishment of a predominantly Jewish state would not have been possible. Without the establishment of Israel, Germany would not have managed so quickly to rehabilitate its reputation and effectively restore its international standing within just a couple of decades after 1945. As a result of police restrictions in Germany, it has become increasingly difficult and in some cases impossible for Palestinians and their allies to gather in mourning and in protest on Nakba Day, which is marked annually on the 15th of May, today, in other words. Esther Bejarano was, as I am, deeply critical of such political repression. I would like to be clear in saying, crystal clear, that no number of cancelled exhibitions, concerts, panels, or lectures will intimidate or silence myself and many others as Palestinians are denied the right to peaceful assembly in this country. As the occupation of Palestine continues, and as the grotesque death toll in Israel-Palestine continues to rise, we will not dampen our voices to comply with German sensitivities that are the direct legacy of this country having industrially massacred 6 million European Jews. In closing, I would like to challenge Minister Streichert-Clivot, who of course is not present this evening, to step out of the shadows and start behaving like a fully grown adult Minister of Education and Culture. I challenge you, Minister Streichert-Clivot, to agree to an open public dialogue with me. I feel confident that the Saarländische Rundfunk would be happy to host a conversation between us. It is time for you to stop hiding. It is time for you to admit that serious mistakes have been made. It is time for you to take responsibility for a decision that was made far too hastily, one that has had damaging consequences far beyond this artist, bringing shame and derision to Saarland and its cultural institutions across the German press and internationally, in the pages of the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and at least another couple of hundred newspapers. Let me assure you, Minister Streichert-Clivot, that ignoring this situation, which you have created, will not make it go away. Let me remind you also that it is your duty as a Minister of Education and Culture to facilitate open and transparent public dialogue. That's part of the job. This includes engaging with people who may not share your opinions, people who you may have viciously wronged. My special thanks this evening to Patrick Bies, Michael Ketting, Sung-Young Cho, and the amazing team that is documenting the talk tonight and which has helped me to start filming a short film about Esther Bejarano. Our filming started yesterday in Saarbrücken and Saarlouis. I look forward to sharing the work with you when it is ready. At a time when the defaming and denouncing of progressive Jews has become a sport in Germany, is becoming completely normal. I am deeply grateful to the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, the Peter Immans Gesellschaft, and the VVN's BDA Saar for inviting me to participate in the ongoing conversation around the Causa Breitz, for giving me the opportunity to state my case in the ongoing public debate, as well as to the Filmhaus Saarbrücken for being willing to put a roof over the head of this Jew who, if you think about it rationally, really might not be the greatest threat to Jewish safety that Germany is currently facing. The last word goes to Ralph Michaels, who, in relation to the ongoing oppression of Palestinian and progressive Jewish political positions in this country, and in response to the dangerous erosion of basic civil rights such as Meinungsfreiheit and Kunstfreiheit over the last 6 months, has reminded us, Sprechen ist ja kein Luxus für friedliche Zeiten. Es ist eine Notwendigkeit für schwierige Zeiten. Talking is not a luxury for peaceful times. It is a necessity for difficult times. Thank you.